In the latest escalation of the long and bitter conflict that has shaped Middle Eastern geopolitics for decades, former President Donald Trump has delivered what he described as his final warning to Hamas following a new wave of violence that shook Jerusalem and reverberated across the globe, adding yet another chapter to the already complicated saga of Gaza, Israel, and the persistent instability in the region, as news outlets highlighted the deadly shooting in Jerusalem where terrorists opened fire in a crowded public place, leaving behind grief, fear, and anger among Israeli citizens while simultaneously provoking an international outcry and calls for restraint, yet underscoring the deep divisions that continue to characterize discussions about Israel and Palestine. Trump's stern words came during a televised statement where he addressed not only Hamas but also broader Middle Eastern actors, referencing the need for the release of remaining hostages taken during earlier confrontations, a demand that mirrors long-standing U.S. and Israeli policy that has historically insisted on no compromise with groups deemed terrorist organizations, and Trump framed the message in terms of both a final opportunity for negotiation and an implicit threat of decisive action, signaling that the patience of both the United States and Israel was running thin after repeated rocket launches, shootings, and even a reported drone attack allegedly linked to the Houthis, which widened the scope of the crisis beyond Gaza and Israel's borders, pointing to the growing entanglement of regional players such as Iran-backed groups and the increasing difficulty of isolating the conflict to a single geography. The Jerusalem attack, carried out on a Sunday that should have been peaceful for worshippers and families, underscored the tragic reality that the Holy City, revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, remains a flashpoint for violence, where symbolic religious and political significance often translates into deadly clashes, and the murder of innocent civilians highlighted the human cost of an unending cycle of violence, making Trump's words both a rallying cry for some who see him as a strong defender of Israel and a point of concern for others who fear that his rhetoric may push the region toward even greater confrontation rather than a resolution. And yet within Christian broadcasting networks like CBN News, the framing of the story highlighted not only the immediate tragedy but also broader prophetic and religious undertones, as Christian audiences around the world often view developments in Israel through a biblical lens that associates the modern state's survival with divine promises, thereby amplifying the importance of Trump's position within evangelical communities that have long been some of his most loyal supporters. As the Gaza standoff intensified, with Hamas refusing to comply with earlier demands for de-escalation and Israel facing a populace traumatized by ongoing threats, the situation became emblematic of the broader stalemate that has defined Israeli-Palestinian relations for decades, where negotiations collapse under the weight of mistrust, retaliations invite counter-retaliations, and external powers intervene with their own agendas, whether it be the United States asserting its global influence, Iran supporting Hamas and the Houthis as part of its regional resistance axis, or other Arab states weighing their roles amidst shifting alliances that have seen some, like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, normalize relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords while others continue to condemn Israel's actions as oppressive, and in this complicated web Trump's last warning carried both symbolic and practical implications. Symbolically reasserting his tough-on-terror persona that had defined much of his Middle East policy during his presidency, including the controversial decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and practically suggesting that if Hamas ignored the warning, harsher measures could be considered, measures that might involve stronger Israeli military responses backed by U.S. political and possibly material support, which in turn risked triggering wider escalations involving Hezbollah in Lebanon or even direct Iranian involvement. Within Jerusalem itself, the deadly shooting marked yet another day where ordinary civilians bore the brunt of geopolitics, their lives shattered in seconds by armed men acting on ideological motivations, and as funerals were held and families mourned, the political class debated strategies, with Israeli leadership under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirming its commitment to security and rejecting any notion of compromise with Hamas, while Trump's words were seized upon by commentators who noted that his influence, even after leaving the White House, continues to shape not only American politics but also the global stage, especially in matters concerning Israel, where his legacy includes both staunch support and polarizing decisions that critics argue undermined peace prospects by sidelining Palestinian concerns. Yet Trump's final Gaza offer was not merely about hostages or immediate security, it tapped into the larger narrative of Western determination to confront groups like Hamas, groups that Western governments classify as terrorist but that also enjoy grassroots support among Palestinians who see them as resistance against occupation, creating a paradox where one side's freedom fighters are the other side's terrorists. And this definitional conflict has long complicated peace negotiations, international diplomacy, and even media coverage, with outlets like CBN News tailoring narratives for Christian audiences that emphasize Israel's right to self-defense and downplay the grievances of Palestinians, while other outlets worldwide present the situation as one of asymmetric power where Israel's military superiority imposes devastating conditions on Gaza's population, particularly during blockades and bombardments, and thus the discourse becomes polarized, leaving little room for nuanced understanding or compromise. Against this backdrop, Trump's statement resonated far beyond the immediate crisis, serving as a reminder of how global leaders' words can inflame or calm tensions, and how in the case of the Middle East, every declaration, every warning, every military action is laden with historical memory, theological weight, and international implications that extend from Washington to Tehran, from Riyadh to Brussels, from the streets of Jerusalem to the refugee camps of Gaza. And so as Trump issued his last warning, ordinary people across the region braced for what might come next, wondering whether this was truly the final step before a larger military confrontation or simply another moment in a long pattern of threats and counter-threats that have yet to resolve the underlying conflict, a conflict that remains one of the most intractable and emotionally charged on Earth.